This week on the show, we've got something pretty different for you. We went to a Linux convention and we asked various people if they've ever tried BSD and what they know about it. The answers may surprise you, so stay tuned for all that and all this week's news, and of course, the answers to your email on BSD Now, the place to be. SD. BSD Now, episode 91, Vox Populi, recorded May 27th, 2015. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
Hey, we're glad to have you guys with us this week. We got an exciting show coming up for you, and a little bit different here. I'm not in my usual place. There's no cool posters behind me or anything. What was that? Just a blank white wall. So actually, this show, on my part anyways, being done live from IX's new offices that are under construction next to their older location. And this will be fun. So I've been out here for the last few days at a hackathon that they've been doing, and just got in late last night from that and caught a few hours sleep, and now we're ready to rock and roll again. So it should be a fun show. I'm a little loopy.
Yes.
But let's get right into your headlines, of course, though.
Yep.
So first up this week, I had to read this twice, Alan, when I saw this initially. I was like, wait, what? So Lux and OpenBSD.
Yeah, well, we were both kind of surprised when we saw Lux in Dragonfly BSD last week.
Yeah.
And we were like, bleh, that's cool.
What?
And,
that's a typo, right?
And then it turns out that somebody else saw that and was like, oh, that's cool. Yoink.
Mm-hmm. So basically what we're talking about is last week we found out Dragonfly is looking at or has added support for dm-crypt, sometimes referred to as LUKS, which is the Linux Unified Key Setup encryption. And we were a little shocked to see that happen. But it looks like now it's not the only BSD that's going to have support for it, as OpenBSD is in the process of reviewing patches for it as well.
Yes.
So this is definitely interesting. But it looks like this would presumably be an additional option to OpenBSD's soft RAID system, which already provides native disk encryption.
But
we haven't heard anything.
I guess it would give you a native disk encryption that was compatible with other ones.
Correct.
Which has certain
I assume
advantages.
that's what I assume, that's the kind of the driving motivation behind this, is you'll have some cross-platform encryption scheme, since we don't have TrueCrypt anymore, and maybe we'll see this find its way into other BSDs too. I suppose if it hits free and net, I mean, shoot, we got something which is really cross-platform at that point.
Yeah.
So, of course, support hasn't been officially committed yet. It's still going through testing, but the code is there if you want to try it and find out or report what you find with it, and give those guys some feedback, let them know the quality of the patch and how it's working. And we'll have links to all that in the show notes, so you can definitely hit those up and give it a whirl. I'd be curious to take a look at that, see how that's working.
Yeah, although the first thing I noticed is that the only hashing algorithm it has is SHA-1, so it doesn't have like 256. Okay. But that's probably part of the upstream Lux, and they can't go diverging from that and still be compatible.
Sure.
But hopefully that maybe they could get upstream to add support for better ones in addition.
Well, yeah, if cross-platform is the whole goal here, then obviously they'll have to be tied to that. But we'll see if it makes it evolve a little bit. Maybe having more BSDIs looking at it means the platform as a whole will improve.
Yes.
Okay, well, speaking of improvements, this one I'm really excited for. So FreeBSD gets the 64-bit Linux emulation stuff. It has landed.
Yes.
So for the uninitiated, those who may not know what we're talking about here, FreeBSD has for a long time had an emulation layer which allows running Linux-only binaries.
Yeah, so basically it takes the Linux binary that you would normally get from sometimes open source program, but mostly commercial programs where they only give you a binary. Like I used to use it to run the Call of Duty 4 game server.
Right.
They would give you a binary and that's all you had. Or even
Team Fortress 2 here.
Yeah, I did Counter-Strike Source as well. And so they just give you this binary. And on FreeBSD, when you run it, the kernel would look at it and be like, oh, that's a Linux binary. So what I'll do is take all the Linux system calls it makes and then translate them to FreeBSD system calls. And so because that's, emulation is kind of the wrong word because it's just doing translation, meant it was perfectly fast. Like oftentimes the game would actually run faster under FreeBSD.
Yeah, that's right. Think of it as we're just doing the calls right now.
Yeah, they're just translating your gobbledygook into real system calls.
That's right.
But the problem that started to crop up more recently was that it only supported 32-bit binaries, and a lot of things are slowly transitioning to 64-bit. And certain things you might want to do, like say you want to run a commercial database like Oracle or something,
Java.
or want to run larger Java application, you need more address space, so you need 64-bit, and it wasn't an option. Luckily, for most Java apps, you can just run the native OpenJDK on FreeBSD. But anyway, so Dmitry Shenjin has been working on this in his user branch for quite a long time. But it's now up to the state where they have decided it's ready, and it was merged into head in a series of like 200 separate commits to maintain the history of it. And that all landed this last weekend.
So you might know this, Alan. Did everything land from that branch, or is it just the 64-bit specific stuff? Like, has the new syscalls gone in for ePOL and some of those other things?
I don't know, although with 200 commits, might have been quite a bit of stuff.
I'm hoping one of them, right? It's snuck in there somewhere. So for those who don't know, like if you run PCBSD or desktop FreeBSD and you have Flash available, you're actually running that through Linux emulation. So there's a plugin wrapper, and it runs the closed source Flash plugin, of course, because we don't have access to that. But so it's been in there for years. We've been using it a long time, and it works pretty darn well.
Yep. I've done quite a few different things with it, and it's always worked perfectly fine. And then sometimes there was some newer stuff that I added to Linux that it didn't support, and part of this project is to bring those things in as well, on top of the obvious 64-bit support. One of the things that's not finished yet is 64-bit versions of all the Linux base ports. But I've been working on that for a while. It stalled a little bit, but it hopefully will get committed by at BSD can, and in that case, we will be able to have it tend to have official packages for it.
We'll have a framework ready to go. That's awesome. So do the 64-bit ports live in the same compat Linux directory as everything else?
Yep, and basically
magically knows what to do.
Well, the 64-bit compat ports will probably mean you can't have the 32-bit ones at the same time.
Okay, you can't mix and match. Okay.
But I think the 64-bit ones have a 32-bit compat layer.
Oh, well, there you go.
Which could be really interesting, running the Linux compat layer on top of the FreeBSD Linux compat layer.
So I know we've talked about this in interviews with BAPT and other folks when we talk about package, but one of the things they're looking at doing is adding support for package to be able to pull from Linux repos as well. So package is actually doing dpackage or apt-get or whatever in the backend and splatting stuff in that directory and recording everything.
Yeah, because basically what happens right now is we use the CentOS RPMs and basically just untar those into the directory, and that installs them.
Yes.
And basically for every different, so we have the Linux base port, which does a minimal install. So it's just a giant list of RPMs. But other than that, we have a bunch of ports that are just install this RPM, install that RPM. It's like, well, if we could just teach package to understand the Yum repo, you could just automatically have every package in any Yum repo that you add to your package repo list. And then
I think that, I think that's 1.6 feature they were looking at for package NG.
Yeah, and that would solve many problems and mean that you could just have a whole CentOS directory in there and just be good to go.
Well, the good news is it's near the end of the month. I'm going to roll another PCBSD current image here soon, which will have this, and then I'm going to go test Steam. Right?
I think Steam is missing one of the system calls that hasn't been recorded yet. It's
so close.
What is it? Something to do with a futex or something? I don't even know what a futex is.
Okay. Right. It's a future text. I don't know.
No, it's like a mutex, but something different. Right? A mutex is mutually exclusive lock, so I don't know what a futex is. But there's something with like inheritance of a property. I don't know.
Somebody's probably typing this into IRC right now. Like, Alan, it's this.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, anyway, somebody fix that. I really want to run Steam.
And there was one note here at the bottom. Meanwhile, the hardened BSD project is actually considering removing that emulation layer because that's a whole bunch more code to audit, and there have always been questions about the Linux emulation layer, and now with a whole bunch of extra changes going on. But I don't know. It seems like it's pretty useful, and I like it.
You may want to consider keeping that. You guys, so there's a link to the poll here. I assume you can go vote on that you'd like to have your voice heard. But also, it looks like similar systems, of course, are in NetBSD and OpenBSD. So we want to mention that. And you can go take a look at the links to those if you're curious to see how their Linux emulation works.
Yep.
Okay, next up, Open Source Conference 2015 at Nyoga in Japan. So, of course, we've covered a lot about Japanese NetBSD users groups setting up lots of machines at various conferences in the past, but they are expanding now. So their latest report includes a lot of the typical NetBSD things you'd expect, but they've got some OpenBSD machines there now, too.
Yes.
Interesting.
And got lots of pictures here.
Okay, yeah, you'll have to narrate those for us.
There's
what do we got here?
a Luna 88K with an OpenBSD sticker on it, so I'm guessing that's running OpenBSD.
Okay.
There's a Raspberry Pi QB board. It says Raspberry Pi RPi QB board, except for I think that's just an RPi, obviously.
Sure.
Nice case, all made out of wood and stuff. That one doesn't really. It's the Luna 88K again, and something else beside it that has a big Apple logo on it. And then a NetBSD running on something, and it's kind of an oblique angle. It's hard to read the labels.
Right.
Then what do you got? This is some kind of flip phone running
Windows
something.
games,
Is it?
Here.
Oh, it is too.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
That is weird. I don't know what that is.
And there's a dual screen OpenBSD 5.5 machine. That's cool.
It looks like they revived their Luna 68K port as well.
Yes.
That's interesting.
Some FreeBSD business cards beside the Raspberry Pi.
Well, if you're into weird esoteric hardware or just old stuff, it's really cool to see this. Another reason why you got to try and hit the BSD conferences, especially when the NetBSD folks are sending a table out.
Yeah, and here's some TK interface for a Twitter client, and somebody sending a test tweet from their OpenBSD Luna 88K machine. I don't think very many tweets on the internet come from one of those.
That might be the only one, right?
Yep. There's NetBSD crashing on something. Looks like they're trying to build a Raspberry Pi image or something, and they got a nice kernel fault.
Nice.
And yeah,
They're keeping it real, folks.
Quite a few pictures. It'd be interesting if there was a group kind of like this going around to some of the conferences in the U.S. showing off this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
it's interesting. Guys. It only seems to happen in Japan.
Is it just that there's more interest for these legacy devices there, or more NetBSD folks?
And just more
general?
weird machines and more NetBSD folks. Yeah. And probably it also helps that it's easier to get to a bunch of different places in Japan.
True.
So, if you wanted to go to like 6 different conferences in the U.S., you wouldn't be able to just hop a train and get there on a small budget. You have to fly, and that makes taking a bunch of old hardware a lot harder than taking a train.
Definitely true. Okay. Well, next up, so we have some new LLVM news. It looks like they have dropped in OpenMP support.
Yes, I know there are some people waiting for this.
Yeah. One of the things, of course, that's kept some people still in the GCC camp has been the lack of OpenMP in LLVM, but not any longer. So according to the blog post here, it says it enables Clang users to harness the full power of modern multi-core processors with vector units. So nice. It's cool to see that has landed. So now, of course, Clang being the default in FreeBSD, Bitrig, and OS X, and with some of the other BSDs starting to explore the options of switching, the need for this potential speed boost was definitely there. So this is cool to see that it has landed, and maybe this will open some more doors for BSD in the area of high-performance computing, which has sort of been a Linux monopoly right now. So it'd be nice to see us competing in the arena. Also
interesting that the support includes ARM architecture processors, PowerPC processors, 32 and 64-bit x86, and has ABI compatibility with the GCC and Intel compilers. So you can link a library that was compiled by one of the other ones together. So that, if your program is compiled with Clang, but you're using somebody else's library, it should just work.
Oh, that's slick. Yeah. Well, we have the links to that if you want to go take a look at all the details about it, of course.
They have
encourage that.
Instructions on how to compile and how to provide the path to your OpenMP library, even if you're using Mac OS X, which makes it complicated, apparently.
Oh, very nice.
Oh, and they have a very short example parallel C program you can compile.
Ooh. All kinds of goodies today that they're dropping on us.
Yeah, just showing you how you can, a basic example how you make sure it's working. And that it's using all your processors to do stuff.
Cool. Well, speaking of goodies that get dropped on you here, here's a good one. As we mentioned, our first sponsor this week, which is going to be DigitalOcean, where they're giving away a pretty cool goodie, which if you use the free BSD Now coupon code, you get basically $10 credit, which, heck, that's 2 months of running a free BSD droplet somewhere in the cloud where you can choose your location where you want it hosted. As we've said before, New York, Singapore, where is it in Europe?
They have Amsterdam, Germany.
Yeah.
And then in the U.S., they have New York and San Francisco. And then for Asia, they have Singapore.
It is quite nice. So, of course,
and,
you can
they also have London. I knew there was one
London
more
as well. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, pretty much wherever you're going to need to be, right? East Coast or West Coast of the U.S., England or, Amsterdam or Germany, and then Singapore. So that pretty much covers everywhere you'd want to be. And they have an easy-to-use control panel, too.
Yeah, for sure. This is a great way to get you started on it. That way you have basically 2 months extra time to play with it, try it out, see if it works for your needs, programmatically learn how to use the API to spin up and tear down VM instances as you're done with them. So definitely want to go over to DigitalOcean.com and give those guys a try. And if you're somebody who's an OpenBSD fan, of course, we had an article a couple weeks back on how you could even convert one of those droplets into an OpenBSD VM. So refer back to the old show if you want to see how to do that. A little bit of trickery involved. But again, very cool that you can do that.
We're here at Linux Fest with Stuart, who has a question for us. So you had a question about BSD.
Yeah, I've been looking for Unix-based program that's developed and stable, so I don't have to keep learning stuff over again, and probably one that has been developed by pardon me if I seem to be speaking ill of the younger people, but some of the older guys who are a lot more concerned about condensed code. And so there's lots of reasons I'm interested in Berkeley software development, isn't it?
Distribution,
Distribution? Yeah, they've been around forever, and I'd just like to take a look at it because I'm hoping that it's compact enough that I can put it on a memory stick and just load it onto my current Microsoft machine. Just, dual boot sort of a thing. Well, that's great.
For a desktop, there's a spin of FreeBSD called PCBSD, maintained by Chris Moore over there, who's at the booth. And it has the graphical installer and sets up an environment very similar to what you would get with Linux, like KDE or GNOME or whatever desktop environment you want. But underneath, you're still getting real, original FreeBSD Unix.
Oh, geez, that's even better,
or you can get vanilla FreeBSD, but the installer is only in text, and you would have to manually add a graphical environment if you want one. It's a little more geared towards servers. But the PCBSD is still the exact same stuff on top, just with some extra candy added on top to make it easier for people switching from Windows.
I hope you can get the word out more.
Yes, that's why we're here at the conference, because we find a lot of Linux users are surprised that you can get the same software you get on Linux on BSD, and it just works, like GNOME and KDE and Firefox and Thunderbird or whatever application, OpenOffice.
That's my favorite browser, too.
Yes, mine too. So we're trying to get the word out, because on top of all that, with BSD, you get a couple of unique features as well. Like our one-time encryption for swaps, so that if you reboot your computer, it's not possible to read what you were doing before you rebooted.
Yeah, that's something that I'm kind of interested in too, because I'm trying to build a network of politically active people.
Right.
And a lot of them are really interested in
communication security and
that's what I did when I was in the Air Force. It scares the hell out of me what's going on right now.
So in addition to the regular full disk encryption system, like similar to what Linux has that BSD has, there's a second one called GDBE, which is embassy grade. And the advantage it has is that there's commands you can do to destroy the encryption, but still acknowledge the right password. So if you're working at the embassy in a country and the bad guys come in and they hold a gun to your head, you give them the password, it accepts it and says that was the right password. Sorry, the data's already been destroyed. Right? Whereas the other one, they were like, oh, you gave us the wrong password, give us the right one or we're going to shoot you. This way, you might stand a chance of getting away. And it might make a difference in your legal defense saying, yes, here, I'm not resisting, I'm not in contempt of court for not giving you the password. I gave you the password, but the data was destroyed before, and there's nothing that can't be gotten back.
Who's that? Bart? No, I didn't do it. Yeah, that's good. Well, awesome. Sounds really good. And it's not like every time you buy a new Microsoft system, it takes 6 months to get it working right, and then you're into a new version and the whole thing all over. I'm tired of doing that. You know.
That's another feature of the PCBSD. It has a system called boot environments, where you can take a snapshot of how your system was before each update or whatever, and then if it doesn't work, you can just roll back, and you get everything back to exactly how it was.
Windows 7 does that, but it's nice to know that it's a
system restore is not the same as snapshots. This is.
I'll take a look at it for sure.
And so when you're booting up the system, you can just pick, I want my system from today, or I want how it was yesterday. And it makes it especially good when you're doing a package update and something might go wrong.
Yeah, well, I can't think of anything that I know of right now that sounds more like what I want to do.
So we're here with John at Linux Fest Northwest. So you say you've used BSD before?
I have.
Which one?
So I have a tendency lately to use FreeBSD for the simple fact that it boots on the middle board.
Yes, that's what we wanted to know.
So the firmware that we ship with on the middle board is UEFI based, and of the three BSDs, FreeBSD has the best support for UEFI. My understanding is that OpenBSD is getting better at it, but they're not quite there yet. And last I heard, NetBSD isn't even working on it. But, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but
that's the interesting thing. Is normally NetBSD is the first thing that gets on anything embedded.
Oh yeah, yep. So, but we've actually got core boot support for the firmware on the middle board. So you can actually get to a legacy BIOS using CBIOS. And at that point, it doesn't matter which of the BSDs, they all boot, they all work. So, net, open, free, they all work at that point.
So you said you've used BSD. Have you done much with it on the middle board?
I have not, but I've got some friends down at Internet Systems Consortium. They've been looking at it.
I see.
For various things, and there's a number of people in the community who have been very interested in BSD, and have been using it and actively supporting it on the middle board.
Cool. Do you know of any cool projects that have used BSD on it?
None that I can talk about, unfortunately.
So there are some.
There are some. I just can't talk about it. So,
Can you tell us a little bit about this quadcopter you've built here?
Oh, so the quadcopter we've got here, it's a off-the-shelf 3D Robotics X8 quadcopter. So I'm not really reinventing any wheels for the quadcopter. It still uses the Pixhawk flight controller, which you can kind of see down there in the bowels. But unfortunately, this is slightly broken because I crashed it on Monday. But
that's how quadcopters go.
Yeah, you buy a $3,000 quadcopter, you crash it. That's just what you do. But usually there's a couple of webcams hooked up that are connected into the minnow board, and then we're doing in-flight computer vision processing. So quadcopters know where they're at and where they're going really, really well. Except that they don't know that there's a tree between where they're at and where they're going. And now you've just crashed, your quadcopter into a tree, and you're probably in a corner crying. But with the cameras, you can at least start doing basic computer vision processing.
Collision detection. Collision avoidance.
Yeah, collision avoidance. Collision detection. So you've got a chance to, possibly detect before you run into things that they're there, and you can set up some basic algorithms to try and go around. Whether they're successful or not, different question, but at least you've got a chance.
Cool. So we're with the BSD Now show, and we're just kind of going around asking people their opinions of BSD and if they've used it and what they thought and what kind of knowledge level is about it. So.
Yeah, well, I guess there's a lot of things that come to mind. Berkeley software, going all the way back to the beginning of Unix, and and then a project with a very long history.
Yes.
And I'm a software developer myself, so
What do you develop primarily?
recently I write a little C code and a lot of Ruby code.
Okay.
So, and I kind of look at the tech news, and I kind of tend to see different innovative things that the BSDs are doing pop up from time to time.
Sure.
And I noticed they've sort of got a core of very dedicated developers.
They do.
And I think that's pretty cool. So,
So have you personally used any of the BSDs, and if so, which ones?
I think I've SSH'd into one from time to time, but I can't remember the last time. So yeah.
Did anything jump out at you as like scary different, or ooh, this is weird because it's not a Linux system that was odd at first?
No, actually, I didn't have a lot of. I didn't have to do a lot of things with it, so it actually seemed pretty much just about the same in my perspective.
So not a huge learning curve or anything, just to get it kind of navigate.
Yeah. I mean, I think it seems like sometimes the differences are overblown. Compared to other operating systems, where the differences are huge, right?
The difference are a lot more minimal in this case.
Yeah.
Well, fantastic.
We're with Jose at Linux Fest Northwest, and you're a Debian developer, right?
I am, yes.
Yes. So, what do you know about BSD?
It's an operating system in the family of Unisys, and it's highly popular in embedded devices, hardware storage vendors, and that type of use cases. It's highly popular, and I do work for Microsoft as well, and we do some work with FreeBSD in particular as well.
Yes, Microsoft's been at quite a few of our conferences recently, promoting Azure and Hyper-V and getting FreeBSD working on that.
Correct.
So have you personally ever used BSD before?
I have in the past tried a couple times OpenBSD and FreeBSD, and it's not my main system either for servers or for desktop. But I can totally see the value in how the tools are kind of like are closer to the core, and Linux is highly dispersed. And now with efforts like systemd, for example, trying to bring those tools a little bit closer to the kernel and the init and all that stuff. It's trying to reverse that a little bit, but still, I think BSD has a advantage of consistency.
Right. What were some of the showstoppers that maybe stopped you from using BSD more?
As a Debian user, I was used to a package management system that was binary centric, having to work with ports and.
In the last couple of years, we've adopted a new tool called PKG, which is the command line syntax is adopted from apt-get.
Okay, that's good to know.
Very similar.
That's good to know. That was one thing. I think at some stage, like trying to get desktop tools working, etc., was a showstopper. But then I realized there were remember there was this PCBSD. Yeah, there was some
spin of it that has all the graphic stuff set up for you.
Correct. And then if I had to start working on it today, I would be a little bit worried about containers, and how do I roll my applications consistently across Linux and BSD.
Right.
That would be a concern today, but I haven't tried recently.
In the coming weeks on our podcast, we'll be covering Cloud ABI, which is a way to actually make a binary that is cross-platform.
Excellent.
Yeah, so that'll be really cool for that kind of thing.
Okay, and so now a question for you. How are you seeing FreeBSD or BSD in general adoption in the cloud? Like people want to run VMs?
Yeah, that's why one of the reasons that Microsoft has been coming to our conferences and helping get the work done so that FreeBSD is a first-class guest in Hyper-V and Azure.
Right.
And Colin Percival's done the work to do the same thing at Amazon. And there's Steve Wills did the same for Google's Compute Engine.
Yeah.
And so FreeBSD, especially like you said, for storage stuff like using ZFS, and for Postgres, since Postgres is first developed primarily on the BSDs, it performs best in that environment.
Right.
And so for web scale databases, Postgres is starting to become pretty big because of its ability to have NoSQL type features and
Right.
your regular consistency of SQL.
Cool. Okay, that's a bright feature for VSD then.
Yeah. And it's because it's separation of the base system and the packages, it makes it, and the long-term support, it makes it very easy to deploy it in the cloud and keep it working for a long time. You know, people tend to think too much in the age of containers that you set something up and you just leave it for a while and eventually you throw it away and build it fresh. Whereas FreeBSD, it's very easy to actually incrementally keep it up to date the whole time.
Right. I see. And so things like systemd, for example, are necessary in the VSD ecosystem.
Yes and no. For the advantages it does provide, there's a project to port LaunchD from OS 10, which is a similar concept.
Right. Cool. Well, thanks for your time.
Yes, thank you. So we're here with Chris at Linux Fest Northwest, and we managed to find more BSD people at the conference. They're kind of hidden away all over the place.
Yeah.
There's Isilon guys over there, and
They don't let us out in public very often.
can you tell us why you use BSD over Linux?
A couple of reasons. First of all, I use FreeBSD. Is the one of choice for me. Probably the primary reason is that I can do a base install on FreeBSD, and I only get a base install and only get a minimal set of things running on it, and then I can add to it whatever I need to it for a server build.
And only what you need for
And
it.
only what I need for that for the pieces that I need running on that server.
Yeah.
So I get a minimal base install, which makes security and tuning so much easier.
Yeah. And Postgres is mostly primarily developed on BSD, right?
I don't know. I think it runs on almost
Originally,
anything.
right.
It might have been originally. Nowadays, I know it runs on Linux, all the Linuxes, BSDs, Windows. It can run just about anywhere.
Yeah. So can you tell us some of the interesting things that Postgres is doing recently?
The 9.5 release is coming out. Hey, is 9.5 in beta right now? Yeah, 9.5 is in beta. There'll be, I haven't looked at the spec sheet on it, so what's coming in 9.5 for sure. I know that they're doing some parallel.
9.4.
They're doing some in 9.5. I know that they're trying to get some parallel query execution in place for it. So, which would be a real benefit in a lot of workloads to be able to split that performance up. So,
and there's some recent NoSQL stuff that's happened.
There's NoSQL. There's support for NoSQL. There's support for JSON. 9.4 introduced extensive JSON support within Postgres.
Chris here with Eric today, and welcome. Thanks. So, first of all, we're at Linux Fest Northwest, for those who don't know, and have you enjoyed yourself?
Oh yeah.
Okay, great. So, we do a BSD Now show, right?
Yes.
So, give us your take on BSD. Do you use it first of all, or is this new to you?
I've used BSD. Mostly I use Linux, but also BSD has a stable implementation of ZFS. That's the big thing.
Have you used ZFS, or you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I build storage servers.
Oh, well, shoot.
Yeah.
What do you use for that? Is it FreeNAS or FreeBSD or Linux? Or?
Actually, I like NAS for free.
Okay.
Simply because it's got the nice interface. Otherwise, stock FreeBSD, and I just deploy what I need.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
and ZFS on Linux is really nice too.
It is, and it's neat having a portable file system that you can use on both now.
Yeah,
eventually,
export, pull the disk, and move them into another
Eventually
hardware.
it'll show up on Mac and Windows, and we'll have a universal file system that
Maybe,
right?
Yeah.
We can all dream, I hope,
Yeah.
anyway. Well, cool. So what's your, what would you say your experience level is with BSD? Or advanced user, or are you sysadmin?
Medium, maybe
Okay.
a little bit. Yeah, I've been doing Linuxy stuff since like 2006,
Sure.
give or take.
Sure.
And I know like one thing, I feel like. So, yeah.
Do you do anything with jails, or are you just purely a storage guy?
No, jails, zones, virtual machines. I run hypervisors.
Fantastic.
And
Have you used the new package NG in FreeBSD?
I haven't used it yet.
Okay.
But I'm giving a talk this Friday on packaging, and
really?
I'm hoping to include it. Yeah.
Okay, well, definitely. We'd love to get your experiences and hear what you think when you try it out.
Yeah, no problem.
That's fantastic. What target platform of FreeBSD are you running? Is it 10 or 9? Or?
10 right now. Yeah, and then a lot of
Great.
my old infrastructure is still on 9.2.
Okay, well, very cool. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and enjoy this interview, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks.
Okay, it's time for the news roundup. But before we get into that, of course, we want to mention the other sponsor this week, which is going to be IX Systems. And the URL for that, ixsystems.com/BSD Now. And funny enough, that's actually where I'm sitting right now. So speaking of IX, I've been out here in California. Not so warm. It's been a little cold this time of year.
Hot here. It was like 30 degrees Celsius.
I know,
and
right?
Humid and.
I didn't even pack a jacket or a sweater or anything. I come out, I'm like, oh, it's California. It's getting closer towards summer. It'll be nice and warm. No, it's been pretty cold. But we've been up at a ranch, part of a hackathon that they're running at the moment for FreeNAS 10. So lots of exciting stuff happening there. I can't spill all the beans, but I think you guys should be excited for FreeNAS 10. It's looking quite awesome. A lot of work going on under the hood at the moment. A lot of things are going to change, but definitely is looking really neat what I'm seeing. So I'm sure we will. A matter of fact, I talked to some of the guys at the hackathon about this. We might need to get a few developers on BSD Now to tell us about some of the new things coming down the pike with FreeNAS 10 here in the near future.
Yes, I hope to have quite a few interviews from them.
Yeah, definitely. We might be able to get a couple of them at BSD Camp
we will,
as well. So we'll have to see if we can
corner some people. I'll have to bring that
kind of like a sneak preview.
That bondage tape that one viewer gave us in Japan. Remember that?
Oh yeah, to tape people up so they can't get away from the interview. Yeah, we're coming.
Paul Hennenkamp joked about us handcuffing him to the chair, and that gave some viewer the right idea to give us some supplies.
Well, trust me, guys, it's not that intimidating, but we will hunt you down if you're not forthcoming with the info that we need. But of course, we're talking about IX Systems right now, guys, and so go hit up that website, ixsystems.com/BSD Now. Fill out the form where you can download the free guide for what you need to know when you're purchasing a server for open source, the right questions to ask, what to expect in your upstream vendor, and things you can learn about talking to management about why you would want to make your next purchases happen from IX. And of course, I highly recommend it. I'm actually out there right now. But Alan, do you have anything currently in the hopper?
We're working on something. Yeah, we need lots more storage. And, if you're going to buy storage, why not buy it from the people that make the most popular NAS software there is? They might know a little bit of something about storage, and especially FreeBSD and storage.
Well, you know what? I'm here right now. I may have to talk to some of the guys about doing like a little video tour of the IX experience or whatever. That could be neat. We could showcase that on a future episode. But definitely go get in touch with the guys from IX Systems. These guys here are awesome sales engineers who know more about a lot of the stuff than you probably do, which is what you want, because they'll tell you, oh, well, you're going to do this. Well, let's do it this way. And this is how we're going to build the system to give you the best performance possible for the particular task you need it to do. Okay, well, it's time to head into the news roundup here, Alan. So what's our first article this week? Some more BSD licensed goodness, I hear.
William Orr has written a BSD licensed implementation of the gettext library.
Oh, okay, nice.
And so this would be very nice to have. Gettext is usually one of the things that almost everything ends up relying on.
Yeah.
And
I always hate it when that port gets updated because it rebuilds
exactly. And then BAPT recently split it into the runtime and the headers or whatever, two separate ports. And so that caused everything to be updated again. And it's like, if we had a version of gettext that we could just include in base, problem solved.
Yeah, that would save a lot of rebuilds for us. But of course, if you've installed ports or packages, you've probably seen that's one of the very first things that gets pulled in.
Yeah. So well, also, if you're building a BSD licensed program and then you end up relying on this one GPL library that's kind of contaminating your program.
Yeah. So for those who don't know what gettext is, it's an internationalization and localization system that's commonly used for writing multilingual programs on, of course, Unix-like computer operating system. So basically anything that has a translation, odds are it's going to be using gettext somewhere there.
So it's basically a library that simplifies the task of, I need to display the string that says there was an error, blah, 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 and you then have translation files that translate that error message into all of the different languages, and then whatever the user happens to be using, they get the right text in their language.
Nice. So this new BSD license rewrite that's begun, it looks like it's being developed under NetBSD. but we're expecting it to be a portable. That's likely anyway. So we'll look forward to seeing if that propagates and makes its way into the other BSDs. And of course, if you've got some coding skills, I imagine they're doing this all in C, it looks like here. So get involved with the project. The more freely licensed replacements, the better for all of us, where we can have more BSD bits in the base. Okay, next up, something you found here, Alan, about a Unix history repo. Tell us what this is.
Somebody, I guess, possibly for their university research project, has created a GitHub repo of the entire history of Unix. So it covers the 44 years since Unix started in 1972, and includes imports of snapshots of version 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 of the AT&T Research Edition Unix, then Unix 32V, all the available BSD releases, all the CSRG stuff from their source code management stuff, the 2 releases of 386 BSD, imports of FreeBSD 1.0 through 1.1.5 from CVS, and then an import of the FreeBSD repository starting with the initial imports that led to FreeBSD 2.0 all the way up to the current FreeBSD repository.
Dang, that's going to take you a while to clone, by the way. I'm sure that's significantly large.
It was interesting because they found, there's a paper here that goes with it, and they found 850 individual contributors that they identified, and now that it's currently 26 million lines of code.
Well, it looks like 659,000 commits.
But they have this nice graph that I'm showing here. And it shows, originally version 6 Unix was, not very many millions of lines of code, and then it grew and grew and grew. But here you can see from the colors how much of the code originated where. So if you're looking at FreeBSD 9, you can see that there's actually a fairly good chunk of code that's still from, BSD 4.3, and then a little bit from, the Net2 distro, and then, there's a chunk that's still unchanged from FreeBSD 2.0. And then there's a reasonable chunk from 4.0, chunk from 5.2, about, I'd say maybe a third of the code in FreeBSD 9 is from FreeBSD 8, and a third of it is new to FreeBSD 9.
Yeah, that's incredible.
It'd be interesting to see what the graph looks like for 10 as well.
I'm curious to look at some of those commits and see which are some of the original bits that are still there.
Well, I found a bunch of them recently. Like the ping command, a lot of that stuff is still from the old original release from the 70s. And I found a couple other apps that have been modified slightly, but a lot of the lines of code are still original from the 70s because the man page was missing the author section, and the original author put in a ticket because he found his name didn't appear in the man page on a Mac. And the Mac's like, well, we get the man pages from FreeBSD. And so I added it to FreeBSD. But they also have a graph here that kind of shows the process. They use, the different versions of Unix. And then in version 6 is where BSD started from. But then BSD release 3 pulled stuff in from the later V7 via Unix 32V. So it's kind of complicated. And then you have the Berkeley SCCS, which was an old, version control system. And it shows all the different releases like Tahoe and Reno and so on, up to 4.4 Lite and so on. And then how that fed into 386 BSD, into FreeBSD. And then they pull right from the FreeBSD Git repo that goes all the way back to FreeBSD 2.0.
Wow, that's fantastic. Yeah, so if you guys want to take a look at some of the history and just follow the steps of evolution of modern Unix operating systems, this is a great place to go start poking around and see how all this happened over, 44 years. It's hard to believe it's been that long.
I know. They also have a link here to NetBSD actually maintains the BSD family tree, which is the giant ASCII art diagram that goes through all of the different ones and shows, FreeBSD, NetBSD, OpenBSD, Darwin, and all the other BSDIs and everything, and kind of shows you how they happened concurrently and so on. And so, the above diagram was just how FreeBSD, ended up where it is. It didn't really show where NetBSD forked off and went in a different direction and so on.
Sure. Cool. Okay.
There's some interesting other graphs here.
Oh, good.
The mean file name length has gotten longer. But the comments per 100 lines of code eventually went up over the course of the 70s, But starting about in the 80s, it stayed pretty much the same, maybe actually trending down a little bit.
Maybe hit closer to the sweet spot. Like this is enough comments.
And the number of
lines.
go-to statements went way down, but it started to trickle back up a little bit over the last couple of years.
Oh, interesting.
But the register keywords is per 100 lines of code has dropped way down as we make less hardware-dependent code.
Mm-hmm.
And they also talk in the paper here about what future work they might be looking at doing.
Okay.
Including trying to increase the faithfulness and usefulness of the repo. Given that the build process is shared as open source code, it's easy to contribute additional fixes through GitHub pull requests.
Okay. Okay, well, cool. Well, next up in the roundup here, just some quick PCBSD news. So we mentioned, of course, 10.1.2 being out. And so this last week, we had just had a hotfix release, which corrects a couple things in the installation. So if you've already installed, no big deal. You don't have to reinstall anything. You can just do your package updates and be fine. But specifically, a couple issues were corrected with doing RAID Z installations with cache and log devices. Some of the device names weren't getting parsed properly there. And also the text-only installer for TrueOS. Some fixes went into place there for UEFI mode, so it'll create some partitions correctly in text mode. So those are a couple reasons why you may want to re-download the ISO if you plan to do any of those type installations. If you have the older images and you're not doing a complex RAID Z installation or UEFI on text, you should be in good shape. But in addition, on the blog this week, a really long blog post put up by my brother talking about the new Lumina desktop and the status update of what's going on in that project. And 0.8.4 has been released, and that's what's out in PCBSD 10.1.2. But he talks about a whole bunch of stuff about being written completely from scratch in Qt5 and not based on any existing DE code base. But some of the future stuff they're talking about doing, one of the big ones I'm looking forward to is rewriting Fluxbox, or not replacing it essentially with its own built-in window manager. So they won't even have Fluxbox there anymore, which will enable them to do some really neat stuff. But
more
talks a lot
integration.
about some of what was
More
that?
integration type stuff?
Yep. Definitely more integration type stuff, and he's talking about some of the features he already has where it has ZFS integration built right into the file manager, so it understands the concept of snapshots and being able to roll back to the history of directories. And they've done some new cool work with widgets for like desktop icons on the desktop, of course. But it's been ported over to quite a number of alternative non-FreeBSD or PCBSD platforms, including some Linux distros. So it's neat to see that it's making it out into the wild. And one good thing, which I really appreciate, it still does not require any of the other desktop implementation frameworks like dbus, PolicyKit, ConsoleKit, systemd, HALD, etc. It's designed to be lightweight and run just out of box, designed on BSD for BSD.
And it doesn't have any of its own applications, right? You don't end up getting a web browser, even though, I'm going to use Firefox. Why do I need Conqueror?
Correct. Well, you're not reinventing the wheel in a lot of cases. Like, there are great web browsers out there, so why would we reinvent the wheel for that when you're just going to use Firefox anyway?
Exactly.
So talks a lot about that, about the things it does do, the things it doesn't do, and of course it's very lightweight and designed for speed and for ease of use. So definitely take a look at that. He's got a cool little slideshow of screenshots of what it looks like with different themes applied and which plugins are available, including battery monitors. It even has like desktop brightness built right in now, so you can adjust that for your screen. Nice system tray support, different plugins for like audio players, calendars, notepads, etc. on the desktop. And what's being worked on right now, of course, as I mentioned, the replacement of Fluxbox, and they're going through and improving the plugin framework and doing some theme work for the upcoming 0.9.0.
Cool. Is Ken coming to BSD Can?
Yes, he is.
Well,
so
I would like to talk to him about his configuration file.
Oh, okay. I imagine you have some UCL goodness you'd like to talk about,
Yes.
right?
His file looks like it'd be mostly compatible.
Okay. Maybe we just need to make that switch then, have that happen. But yeah, he will be out at BSD Can as well.
Yes.
So if you'd like to talk to Ken about Lumina Desktop, come on by and grab him while we're out at BSD Can.
But yes, I guess you mentioned here works on FreeBSD, PCBSD, Open, Dragonfly, KFreeBSD, Debian, and most other generic Linux distributions.
That's right. That's right. So there are a lot of different ways you can grab the Lumina desktop, and I know I had some people comment at the hackathon too. It's nice to see that there's a desktop environment that's actually being worked on still actively. A lot of the smaller ones have kind of just stopped being worked on 10 years ago, right? We're still running the same Fluxbox for the most part. So it's neat to see kind of a fresh implementation and actually being done on a BSD, and we're not having to go through and port everything and have all this cruft that wasn't designed for BSD and doesn't work quite properly.
How about that? A desktop manager designed to be portable so you can use it wherever you happen to be instead of, let's just take a bunch of shortcuts that don't actually save any time and write it only for ROS.
That's right.
But I do like as he goes through the different layout samples, he has ones that don't look like GNOME.
Right.
It's like, yes, right? and there's one that looks like Mac OS, and there's one that looks like GNOME, and then, hey, there's one with a start menu. That's what I want.
Right. Yeah, so you can customize it any way you want and have it look completely different. So I prefer the more KDE style, so I don't mind that way. But you get to pick and choose, which is pretty nice.
I'm just used to buttons being in a certain place, and if they can stay there, that would make me very happy.
Right? Muscle memory. Like my mouse cursor goes here when I want to do this.
Oh, and then he has a whole breakdown of why he's looking at replacing Fluxbox, because he wants better interface and font scaling, because 4K monitors are a thing. And
it is.
Integrating the keyboard shortcut, so you define one set. That's always the biggest thing with Unix, is you get every program trying to have its own set of shortcuts, and then it's
Yeah. So also different types of window manager modes for different types of devices, because he's designed it also to have kind of a touchscreen interface. So it could be used on a touchscreen device and then compositing between windows, so we can do transparency. And then, of course, uniform theme and appearance. So one thing actually you didn't mention here, but something related to Lumina is we're looking for the next release of PCBSD to integrate it with the login manager, so we can do suspend of sessions better and resume and whatnot.
Cool.
So that should be interesting, and we're looking at an implementation of that at the moment. Okay, it's time to get to your questions and comments, emails you guys have sent to us throughout the week. But of course, before we do want to mention Tarsnap now, which Tarsnap is going to be at tarsnap.com/BSD Now, where of course you can go and fetch the client and get your backups up and running before we finish the next segment. So come on, it's not really complicated. Set up an account, deposit a few dollars, and just that'll last you quite a while, especially if you're backing up a very consistent set of data and just sending the changes. But I think I saw something on Twitter this week about they did some work to make it more easily compilable on non-BSD systems.
That was spiped. That was feature. But I think that's used as part of Tarsnap, so inherently, yes.
Yes.
It also he has this design principles document up on his website, and he talks about the 4 design principles being security, flexibility, efficiency, and utility. And it's like backup should be provided as a utility with a linear per gigabyte cost. Compared to other systems, they're forcing people to figure out ahead of time how much data they want to back up so they can sign up for the right plan is pretty dumb. And having some customers subsidize other customers is inherently unfair, right? Because for most of those plans, the whole idea is people that aren't going to use all of what they pay for, and you use that to be able to offer the bigger plans for less money or whatever. It's like, well, if storage has a fixed cost per gigabyte, then charging people a price per gigabyte is much more fair.
Makes more sense, yeah. So, Tarsnap makes it super inexpensive to do. And because he does the encryption properly, where everything's encrypted before it leaves your system, you don't have to worry about who on the remote end maybe has access to your data, or who could be coerced into giving access to your data.
Even though Colin is a very trustworthy guy, the entire point of Tarsnap is that you don't have to trust Colin at all. You can look at the code, see that it does exactly what it says it does, know that only you will have the key, and know that no matter how many of his fingernails the NSA pulls off, Colin will not give up the data, because he can't. Even if he wants to, he can't.
Yeah, so NSA, you can leave Colin alone now, by the way. He can't give you the key.
Please don't
you can
pick on
untie
Colin
him from the basement and let him come to BSD Can. But no, seriously, guys, go to get it set up at Tarsnap. Super simple. You can be done in just a couple minutes, and you'll be backed up and good to go. Okay, first up this week, we have Jake, who writes in asking about an empty pool. He said, I added a drive to a machine, partitioned it for ZFS, created a pool, and put a bunch of files on it. So he sends us what his Z-pool list shows, and
It does show that he's got
ask me about
16.2 gigabytes of data in his /storage pool. And interestingly, there's like a terabyte of storage missing somewhere.
right.
I guess
Yeah,
he has
then it shows the
other
CFS lift.
other sub data sets and so on that contain stuff. So there's a couple things that can happen to make it look like this, especially if you're adding the pool after the fact, right? If you didn't have a pool before and you added one, is that if ZFS_enable equals yes is not turned on in your rc.conf, then the ZFS datasets will not be mounted by default. And because of that, so you'll have the empty /storage directory because the ZFS dataset is not mounted. So if you do ZFS mount -a, it'll mount them all. And then if you look in /storage and it's there, maybe that's what's going on. Because it says it refers to 16.2 gigabytes of data, that suggests that there actually is data there. If it didn't, you might assume that maybe the other way around happened. You accidentally saved the data to /storage when the ZFS wasn't mounted, and so the data actually got written to / in a directory called storage instead of a separate mount point. But because the refer column says there is data there, it most likely is there. There's a couple of things you can do that. There's a property called mounted. So if you do ZFS get mounted storage, it will say yes or no whether it was mounted. And then there's also the can mount property, which if that got changed to no, then you won't be able to mount that data set, and that will confuse you. And you can change that or mount it manually with mount -t ZFS. Or no, you can't. No, even if it's can mount, you can't ever mount it even manually. But you can change it to no auto to leave it not ever be mounted by default, but allow you manually mount it if you need to. And a couple different things like that that are likely what's happening. But I'm guessing what happened is that it's just not mounted. So if you do ZFS mount storage or ZFS mount -a for all, your files should suddenly show up. And then if you set ZFS_enable equals yes in your rc.conf, it'll get mounted at boot every time.
Okay. Well, let us know if that ends up being the problem, just out of curiosity, if that fixes it for you.
But yeah, that pool definitely has some stuff in it because it's got 39% fragmentation, and it's, there's lots of data in there.
Make sure you don't have any snapshots hanging on there, too.
Yeah, but that wouldn't show up as a refer column.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
Because, his whole data set there has 1.8 terabytes of data on it, but his /storage has 16.2 gigabytes. So if it's just not showing up, I'm guessing it's either not mounted or can mount as false or some version of that.
Some variation.
If you still can't figure it out, in addition to the output you send, if you could send us ZFS get all storage, that'll give us all the properties, and something might jump out at us from that.
Okay. Well, cool. Next up is Van, who writes in about a BSD life follow-up. So he says, just some updates in my life with BSD from a sysadmin perspective. He said, I haven't written anything but the occasional shell script since the late 80s. So he says, number one, IWN works, at least in OpenBSD current as of 5.19. He said, I was not successful in getting it to work on release, but it just works in current. So me being lazy and all, that's what he's using. He says, I have a Lenovo E40 440, a relatively cheap machine with an Intel 7260 running like a champ. XFCE looks really, really good. I finally ditched Fluxbox. Chrome runs really fast. Kudos to the OpenBSD devs as they did an incredible job on 5.7.
Interestingly, in the developer chat room, I've seen some development towards the 7260 on FreeBSD, except I'm not sure, but I think that might end up being called IWM on FreeBSD.
Yeah, I think I've seen that as well.
But there are a bunch of different versions of the 7260, which is slightly confusing. There's one that's AC, one that's N, and one that's like N and Bluetooth or something like that.
Oh, nice.
And so it's working for some people and not for other people, probably because all those cards with exactly the same model number are not anything alike. I don't know why they would make the 7260 that's an N, an AC, and an AC plus Bluetooth, and it's just like, And then I was looking at getting one for my laptop, so that at BSD we can hack on it or whatever. And it's like they also offer it in a bunch of different form factors, right? There's like the mini PCIe adapter card that my older laptop will take, where the newer ones take the M.2 next generation form factor thing with a bunch of different keys and craziness.
That doesn't make it confusing at all.
Hopefully FreeBSD will be able to catch up on the 7260.
Okay. Oh, maybe that'll come out of BSD can if somebody brings a few of those. And they can finish debugging them. He says, number 2, I started ripping out pfSense installs because IP chains is just so much better. He says, just kidding about the second part. Ever since the move to 2.2, I've experienced all manner of weirdness on the 2 identical systems I run, one for the office and one for home. One example of this was an IPv firewall not logging what happened if IPv6 was enabled. Another system was flapping all the NICs when just one of them failed, which rather urgently caused such a migration to occur.
Well, there's a setting in crypt to control whether you want the downing of one NIC to down all the NICs or not. It's called preemption. Yeah.
Maybe that's okay. He said, about a year and a half ago, I moved them from OpenBSD to pfSense and have now moved back. It remains to be seen how much of a performance hit I'll take due to threading, which these are on Atom D525 systems.
So they only had one other core, so I would expect the difference to be kind of small.
Yeah. He said, aside from easy RSA3 providing a few speed bumps, in other words, OpenVPN clients needing to clear the NSCert server options, he said everything just seems to work. So thanks again, and keep up the good work.
Yeah. There's some interesting benchmarks about the different implementations of PF and so on different hardware that will be presented at BSDCan.
Okay.
They compared, I think it was PF on OpenBSD to PF on FreeBSD with and without a couple of settings or something like that, and comparing it to IP tables or whatever on a CentOS machine, all on the same hardware, and found that, while OpenBSD is slightly faster on one core, obviously having multiple cores in PF on FreeBSD helps it there. But, at a lot of cores, the CentOS one was actually working better up until some patches. So hopefully from that information, they can figure out what the problem is and get it fixed.
Sure. Okay.
But yes, that's a interesting project that'll be at BSDCan.
Nice. Well, next up is an anonymous writer who asks about ZFS backups. He says, I'm building a new hobby colo that a friend and I run. Friend is still not convinced of ZFS. Our machine will be doing DNS, web, and mail for a handful of domains. One of his claims is that our hardware is too underpowered. We're using older leftover hardware, but I don't really think it's under the task, and he has a link here to what it is. He said ours is a two 3.6 gigahertz Xeons. We put 12 gigs of RAM in it. We have 6 SCSI drives, and we have the RAID controller defeated, and each drive appears individual to software. ZFS is pooled in Z1 at the moment. He said, I want to redo it with your recommendation of Z2 to be able to lose the 2 drives. So he says, what are our thoughts on performance? Would it be able to put in replacement disks live without a reboot? Or is it possible that limitations of the hard drive controller will still force us to reboot before a rebuild?
That really depends on the drive controller. So I don't know what futzing you had to do to get the drives to show up individually. If it was creating a 1-disk volume in the RAID controller on each disk, then it comes down to, does your disk controller allow you to do that from the command line in BSD? But really, if that's the case, then you might end up having to reboot. Whereas if when you just plug the drive in, it shows up, then in that case you should be okay. And it seems like something you should be able to test fairly easily by just swapping a drive with one that's not formatted or whatever, and seeing if it shows up properly before you even start the build, kind of thing. And in that case, if it shows up, then you'll be able to just do the gpool replace and not have any trouble.
Nice. So he said, badmin and snapshots are my biggest selling points of ZFS. He said, my friend wants to compromise by doing hardware RAID 5e and a single disk pool on top in order to retain these features. Any thoughts?
The biggest problem with that is ZFS will detect silent corruption errors and not be able to fix them because it only has one thing. If you really wanted to do it that way, your best bet would be, if you have 6 drives, create 2 3-disk stripes with no redundancy in the RAID controller, and then in ZFS you would expose those 2 and then mirror them. Obviously the downside to that is your RAID controller probably is not going to like it. It's going to want to kill all 3 if you lose one out of a stripe, so that probably won't work either.
Just give it the real disk. Come on.
Yeah.
That's just the right answer in this case.
Exactly. Usually the problem is the RAID controller getting in the way often, but RAID 5e isn't as good as RAID Z2 or RAID 6, because RAID 5e is basically the RAID 5 with a second parity disk that gets some of the load kind of thing. but it's kind of like RAID 5 with a hot spare. It's not quite as good as using all the disks all the time.
Sure.
RAID 6 should be better. But yeah, if your RAID controller is getting in the way, it can cause problems. We talked about some of the gotchas with that and so on in the FreeBSD Mastery ZFS, which you can buy at zfsbook.com. The
Shameless
ebook is
plug.
now available. It's been published, and Michael just got the proofs for the print edition, and the cover doesn't look quite right, so we're making a couple tweaks to that, and hopefully get that sorted out.
Okay, next question is from Dominic, who has a PF question. He says, "Hey guys, I'm watching the show from the beginning and also following the tutorials and blog posts regarding everything to do with BSD. I'm loving it. Also trying to support the community with buying books and donating to FreeBSD and OpenBSD foundations, as all my machines are running on some kind of BSD. Currently, I started experimenting with PF on my home network, and I wanted to tighten things up a little bit more. So I basically started from scratch. Everything was fine until I ran into some problems when trying to separate 3 local networks. So I was wondering if you could help brother out." He said, "I'm running OpenBSD 5.7 with the following pf.conf to keep it simple for now." And then he lists his interfaces, his block-in rule, and pass out. And he says, "All networks should be able to access the internet but not talk to each other freely. I was using the following rules so far to access the internet and let the clients talk to each other to begin with." And then he shows us his match out and pass-in rules. And after reading through the PF book and checking the FAQ section on openbsd.org, I couldn't come up with an appropriate solution other than blocking individual or groups of devices and networks. My last try looked something like this. And then he lists his various pass-in rules. So he says, still have internet access everywhere, but all the clients can still talk to each other. I can see why this is not correct, but after 5 hours of reading, trial and error, and frustration, I thought I'd rather ask you guys in the hope you could point me in the right direction before making the same mistakes over and over and over again, spending another day in a config loop. So he says, I don't mind reading some more or comparing example rule sets if you have a link or two for me as well, but I want 3 separate networks, and any help that fills in my knowledge base is much appreciated. Other than that, awesome show, guys. Keep rocking.
Yep. And so TJ actually wrote up a config for him. And basically, to simplify it, he renamed the different networks red, green, and blue. And then he, set up the rules. And basically, you have you're letting everything go out and added to the internet, and everything working like you would. And then at the bottom here, because in PF the last match wins, which is different than other firewalls, and you just say block all inbound traffic on the internal interface that's coming from red if it's going to blue or green. And then the same thing if it's from blue but is going to red or green, and if it's from green going to red or blue. And then that stops them from talking to each other, but they can all still talk to the internet.
Yeah, makes sense. Nice. So you'll have to hit up the link if you want to see all the details there on what that looks like if you're hoping to do something similar on your network. Okay, last up we have Chris with a SpamD question. He says, "Hi, after hearing about it on your show, I set up SpamD at my company. It stops spam, however, it does not play nice with sites that resend email from a different server each time." He says, "I maintain a whitelist of domains that I catch doing this, like Gmail. Since PF requires IP addresses, I have a script that converts domain names to SMTP IP addresses using SPF. This works well with sites that use SPFA records. Unfortunately, Yahoo does not. I have to take a different approach with them. Is there a better way to get gray listing without all the babysitting?"
Yeah, I can definitely see how that can be a problem, especially for bigger places like Google and Yahoo. There is DNSWL.org, which is a whitelist of known good senders, and they rank them based on, this place never sends spam, and if there's ever spam, they shut it down right away. This place, usually doesn't send spam. This place has sometimes sent spam, but they eventually fix it, and so on. They have different rankings. And you can get their data in addition to their DNS or block list version. You can get it as a text file over rsync, and you could import that into your BGP SpamD setup, so that you would say, here's a list of people that are known to be not spammers, and we will skip gray listing for them.
That may fix 99.9% of the problem right there.
Yeah, but yeah, the problem with the fact that Google sends you an email, so you temporarily fail it and add them to the whitelist, and then when they try again, they do it from a different address. And we had partly the same problem at the setup we used at Scale Engine. So that's why we started using the DNS whitelist, and also just some other tweaking.
Okay, nice. Well, guess what? We have one mailing list goal this week, and I'll let you read this one, Alan, but it's called Death by Chocolate.
So this is a email titled Weak Diffie-Hellman Primes in OpenSSH, and they asked, does anybody have a pointer to any decent free software for generating and verifying the primality proofs? And there's a response here from somebody saying that OpenSSH generates strong pseudo primes to k random bases, so that if the prime would be a safe prime, and it says he thinks that Darren used k equals 100, so the best way to that the math works out, each number he generates has to be 1 over 4 to the power of 100 possibilities of being a composite or whatever. And anyway, it explains some of the different things, and it says death by chocolate bar is about, and then a prime number that's the whole screen width, more likely to happen than you being given a Darren prime turns out to be a composite of that. So lots of crazy math about a death by chocolate bar chance of something happening.
The odds of that.
The interesting thing is that in FreeBSD's tree, just today or yesterday, I think, the security officer imported the new OpenSSH module file from OpenBSD, saying that, well, there's no proof there's anything wrong with the old ones. Changing it every once in a while is considered good hygiene.
Oh, that's good thinking. Okay, well, as we wrap up the show here, folks, of course, we want to remind you to please send your questions or comments, or if you have an idea or topic you want us to talk about on the show, or some story you find floating around on the interweb, it's just best to send it in. Maybe we've messed it, but send it in. We appreciate getting the heads up. And you send those to feedback@bsdnow.tv. And we usually monitor that, and TJ, our producer, often will respond very quickly when you send something in there. So also, we're recording 2 episodes next week. So if you have extra questions you want to get in or something you've been waiting, send it in, because we're going to record an extra episode so we can get ready to go to BSD camp.
Yes, so we need all the help we can get.
Yes. So please send in those questions, and we'll be happy to answer them for you next week. But also, we appreciate you guys watching, and stay tuned next week as we're getting ready to ramp up into BSD Can. There's going to be all kinds of crazy news coming out of that, I'm sure, and lots of good stories to tell as well, which we always enjoy. The first episode after a conference is crazy.
Always so much stuff to unload on you guys, and we only ever remember half of it.
I know, and then it kind of just trickles out.
Yes,
over
the next
weeks,
month after a conference, we're just talking about all the awesomeness that happened there.
Yep.
And then we'll all be getting excited for VBSDCon.
That's right. Yeah, it's going to be an exciting summer. So definitely keep it tuned to BSD Now. We'll look forward to talking to you guys next week.